Welcome to Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm Director of Product Marketing for our cloud providers at VMware. And today joined by Jay again. Welcome back, Jay. Thanks a lot for coming on board. Do you want to just provide a bit of detail on what you do and your role in VMware?
Awesome. Sure. Thanks, Guy. So hello, everyone. My name is Jay. I work with the CIBG team as a Senior Technical Product Marketing Architect, and I primarily take care of VMware Cloud Director product along with most of its extensibility. And I basically help our team with the go-to-market and feature updates for these products. And along with these, I take care of NSX and NSX ALB for all the GTM categories within this team.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I mean, you do a hell of a lot, mate. I mean, you really do. And you're doing, so let me guess right, you're doing all VCD, all of the integration with NSX, all of the advanced load balancer, then within VCD, a bit of the extensions as well. So that's a huge portfolio. And we've got a new release, right? 10.4.2.
Absolutely. So we are here for VMware Cloud Director 10.4.2 release, which was released on last Friday. Last Thursday, in fact, and then we'll talk about what's new in it, what has been enhanced. It's a minor release. We call it a dot release, but it has 2 or 3 good features, which was much awaited. And then I'll talk about it as we proceed.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited about this because it's there's really good position here for security and sovereign cloud and locking down workloads to particular hosts and encrypting them using TPM and stuff like that. So super excited to see how this is translated into Cloud Director. So let's go for it.
Awesome. Sure. So let's start with the agenda. So it's a simple agenda. We'll talk about technical stuff. We'll basically look around what's new in this release. And then we'll talk about the interoperability and the upgrade path we have to follow. And then, of course, Guy, if you have any questions in between, you can surely ask me, or if not, then we can park it at the end as well.
No problem.
Awesome. So to begin with VMware Cloud Director 10.4.2 release, we have categorized this release into 3 major pillars. One would be the core platform, in which we have finally got some nice features from a sovereign jurisdiction perspective. So we basically now support vTPM, which was much awaited by most of the cloud providers. And then, of course, we have introduced something called as IDP Proxy. It's for TMC local. So these basically are a security enhancement we have introduced from this version onwards. And then few operational improvements which will make your admin tasks easy. Like, for example, if you're a provider admin, the way you can navigate or log in to the portal is much better. And then we have tweaked a bit of policies, like, for example, the vApp lease policy. We have continued our second phase of local user deprecation, and then we have changed certain method by which the named disk ownership can be now better managed. And from a storage perspective, we have reformulated how the data threshold free space is calculated. It was a major issue previously. And then, of course, now we support vSAN HCI Mesh in a much better way, respecting all the VCI Mesh policies. So these are the major minor updates within this release. And the link to the blog for the what's new release has been put on the slide in case, basically the blog for this is available live in the cloud provider space. So you can put that as well. So from a vTPM perspective, it was a bigger chunk of modules. So what I've done is I'll basically straight away open the blog and take you through what has been introduced and what all we do with it. So yes, this is a major step forward to enhance or rather secure your cloud data. So we all know what is a trusted platform module. And we also understand that our vSphere pillar, right, our vSphere based software already supports vTPM. So now that has been extended to VMware Cloud Director. So VMware Cloud Director is now capable and smart enough to understand and is capable of creating a vTPM devices for your virtual machine. Based on the operations you perform, the vTPM device option available to you will vary. So that's what we have introduced in this release. Certain criteria to understand before we can use vTPM within VCD. As mentioned, you must have a KMS server pre-configured onto the vCenter server for you to be able to use the virtual trusted platform module, because it's the KMS server which basically assigns the keys and manages the keys. Of course, your virtual machine must be an EFI boot firmware, and of course, the virtual machine operating system should be EFI boot and vTPM aware. And then virtual machine encryption. This is basically one step ahead of virtual machine encryption. And as mentioned, we support the vTPM with VCD if it's a Windows machine using vCenter Server 6.7 upwards, and if it's a Linux machine, 7.0 update to upwards. So these are the conditions you have to meet before you can actually use vTPM within VCD virtual machine.
Jay, just on the KMS piece, right? So I understand 100% going to have a KMS within that vCenter environment, but if I've got a dual data center environment, I want to create some resiliency here. Is it the same? I mean, that KMS must be spanned across both sites, right? In a highly available configuration.
Yeah. Correct. So if you look at the heading here, right, I've mentioned for within same vCenter.
Yeah.
So like you said, Guy, if you want to have a resiliency across vCenter servers, which is backing the same VCD, yes, both the vCenter server must have the same KMS with the same name.
Okay.
Right. So that's one thing you have to make sure. And of course, when we talk about cross vCenter, we have to fall back to our older feature, which is fast cross VC instantiation, which needs a shared data store. So basically, shared data store across vCenter servers, and the same KMS must be configured with the same name in both the vCenter. Okay, so before we dive deep into this feature, certain things you have to understand. How this information, how the key information is passed on to VCD is basically the KMS will talk to vCenter, and your VCD will talk to your VDC, which is your virtual data center. That's how the information is passed on. So once we configure KMS with vCenter server, okay, from this version onwards, VCD is smart enough to look at the vCenter server and understand if KMS server is configured or not. You would not be able to see anything on the UI, but VCD will understand whether the backend VCD, which is integrated with the current infrastructure, is KMS capable or not. Same information is then forwarded or rather passed to the virtual data centers, which will actually deploy the virtual machines. And based on this detection, when we deploy a virtual machine or a vApp, we have the vTPM option to be selected from, and then we can actually add a vTPM device to our virtual machines. So this is how the information of KMS flows within VCD.
Jay, for the vApp, is it individually doing each VM within the vApp, or is it doing something different now?
From what perspective?
From the encryption perspective of, if you do a VM, that makes absolute sense to me. It's encrypted with the vTPM. But if you're creating a whole new vApp, and you've got 4 or 5 VMs within that vApp, are they all individually done, or is it done?
Yes, it's all individually done. Each VM will have its own vTPM, and each VM can only have one vTPM device.
Got it. Okay.
So when we present the vTPM option within VCD UI, right, there's something called as copy or replace. These two options play a key role on how the virtual machine rather the VCD workflows would function. So basically, it's clear with the text, right? Copy means it will copy the vTPM device and the keys as is. And if it's a replace, when a virtual machine, let's say, for example, is being deployed through a vApp, and if the vApp was captured using the replace option, then when the VM is instantiated, the vTPM device would be a replaced device. So these two are very important for us to understand whether what option would be available to us while performing which VCD workflow. So copy and replace.
Got it.
This feature is supported from version vCenter server version upwards. If a VM has been created in vCenter server 8 backed VCD, then it cannot be moved to vCenter server 7 backed VCD because of the hardware version. Just something to keep in mind. In case your vCenter server has multiple KMS servers, by default, we do not have the option to choose which KMS server can be used from the VCD side. Whichever KMS server is defaulted at the vCenter server level or at the cluster level, which is backing the VDC, that KMS server will be used for your VCD workflows. And in general, like I've mentioned, only one vTPM device is allowed per virtual machine. And the VM boot firmware should be EFI, and the operating system must be of EFI, and the vTPM device, basically the operating system should be vTPM aware. And if you look at the VCD workflows, right, we have various VCD workflows, for example, virtual machine creation, vApp creation, template creation, virtual machine instantiation, your catalog clone, a lot of things. So vTPM basically is now capable of understanding each of the VCD workflows. So if you look at the table here, this is the workflow actions we have from a VM creation perspective. So for example, if I create a new VM, let's consider now all of our previous criteria are met, all the prerequisites are in checklist, the checklist is taken care of. So if you create a new VM, of course, it will ask for you to attach a new vTPM device. If I'm creating a VM from a template, the condition here is that if the template was captured to the catalog with the option replace or with the option copy. If the template was captured with the option replace, and if I instantiate a VM from that template, obviously I'll be given the option to replace the vTPM device. Same goes with copy.
Yep.
Okay. If I'm editing or reconfiguring a virtual machine, basically it says to detach a TPM device from a VM, we have to make sure that the VM is powered off. Very, very important step. I mean, so basically you cannot just detach the vTPM device while the VM is powered on. And then when I'm copying the VM, it's the same thing. When the destination vApp, again, when I'm copying the VM, obviously I'll copy a VM from one vApp to another vApp, right? So if the destination vApp is backed by vCenter server 7, then only the copy option will be available. That's a vCenter limitation. Okay. If I'm copying a VM to another vApp powered on or functional vApp, and if that vApp is backed by vCenter server 8 version, then I'll be given the option to copy and replace.
Okay. Yeah.
If I move a virtual machine, it is not possible to replace the TPM device regardless of the vCenter server, obviously, because I'm moving a VM, not editing it. So it has to carry forward the same keys and same TPM device. And if I'm importing a VM from vCenter server, basically a move or a clone, the copy option is the default, which is selected regardless of the version of vCenter from which the VM is being imported. So these are the criteria, or these are the options you would be provided with all the virtual machine workflows. Now, how do you know whether my virtual machine has a vTPM device or not? We have a new view, which is called the security devices under each virtual machine. Irrespective of whether you have a vTPM device attached to the VM or not, this option would be available. If the VM has a vTPM device attached, it will say present. If not, it will say not present. And this is the option when we edit the virtual machine which has a TPM device. It says it will give you a warning that any removing a TPM device obviously will the data within the VM will not be able to be recovered, because the TPM device which was backing the data for encryption is now being lost. So that's the reason we have to toggle this button and then get the vTPM device removed from the virtual machine while it is powered off. vApp workflow is same as virtual machine workflow. When I'm creating a new vApp from VM template, it will be same as creating a new VM from the template, depending on what was captured while copying the template or while capturing the template, whether the option replace was selected while capturing the template or copy was selected. So accordingly, when I'm instantiating, I will be shown with the respective option. When I'm doing a vApp creation using an OVF package, yes, of course, it'll attach a new vTPM device to each of the VM within the vApp.
Yeah.
If I'm adding a new VM to a vApp, same as create a new VM, basically I'm adding a new virtual machine, so it will be always a new vTPM option. Adding a VM from a template to a vApp, same as creating a new VM from a template. And same thing for copy vApp, move vApp, and as we see in the VM workflow, virtual machine creation workflow. And then if we are importing a vApp from vCenter server as a vApp, the copy option is default, same like the virtual machine. We'll only be seeing the copy option irrespective of whichever virtual machine, whichever vCenter server is been backed by that virtual machine, for that virtual machine. Now, if you move on to the vApp template workflow, okay, when I'm creating a new template, I will be given both the options, whether I want to capture this template with the copy option or the replace option. This is the decision we have to make and capture the template. And then based on this decision, when I'm deploying or instantiating a VM or a vApp template from that template, that option will be provided to the end user. If I am copying a vApp template, okay, now again, depending on the create vApp template selection, if a vApp template was captured using copy option, I will be given the copy option. If a vApp template was captured using a replace option, then the TPM device will also be set to replace. And then when the virtual machine or the vApp is been instantiated, you will be forced to replace the vTPM device. Move vApp template, same. I'm just moving the template. I'm not changing any details in it. And download or export vApp template. This is not allowed because it's a vCenter server limitation. So that's the reason the workflow is restricted if any VM within the vApp template have a TPM device attached. It's again a vCenter server limitation. Now, from the catalogs view, which is the templates view, right? We have a new column called the vTPM provisioning, and it'll let the user know whether this template was captured using the replace option or the copy option.
Yeah.
I can zoom a bit. So the user will know whether which vApp template I have to use, whether I have to use the same TPM device with the same security keys, or I have to use a template which will replace the vTPM device. So this option is not available by default. You have to enable it from the selection box. Check this column, and then this table will be listed for the information to be seen. Now, where were we? Oops. Okay. This is all about the workflows within the same vCenter server. Okay. Now, if like we spoke in the start at the starting of this topic, if it's a cross vCenter server operation, yes, the same KMS server must be configured on the second vCenter server with the same name, and we must have a shared storage for fast cross vCenter vApp instantiation, because we have this new feature introduced in 10.4.1, which will basically save almost 90% of the time when we have to do a cross VC vApp copy or clone.
Yeah.
Operations allowed across vCenter server, something you have to know. We can do a copy or a move of a virtual machine, copy or move of a vApp, instantiate a vApp template when the template copy the TPM during instantiation. We can save a vApp as a vApp template to another catalog, which is backed by a destination vCenter server, which is basically another vCenter server. We can add a standalone VM to a catalog across vCenters, create vApp templates from OVF, or import a VM from vCenter server. So it is all these tasks are possible when we have a VDC or VDCs backed by different vCenter servers. If in case you run into any issue as a tenant user, you would be given the following error messages when basically if the KMS requirement is not met, you would see basically that cannot move or clone VM. The operation is not available at the destination. So that means that KMS requirement is not met. And when, so, okay, just to let you know, these errors are for cross vCenter server task, which fails.
Yeah.
And when the shared storage is not there, it is straightforward like before. When it will clearly say that obviously the TPM option or the TPM copy or replace will not happen because of the destination vCenter server not having, or rather both the vCenters not having a shared storage requirement. Now, if we have to, we all understand the concept of publisher and subscriber in catalogs, right? So here as well, we support, or rather it's TPM aware now. So what it says, there is a limitation to be aware of where only vApp templates that were captured with the replace TPM option will be synchronized at the subscriber side. Again, why? Because this is a vCenter server limitation. For fast cross vCenter, we can just do a replace, not a copy. Okay. Right. So for that, only the vApp templates which are in the publisher catalog with the replace TPM option will be synchronized on the subscriber side, irrespective of whichever vCenter server it is on. So that's one thing you have to understand. So what will happen with this? If you look at the publisher catalog and the subscriber catalog visually, right, you might see more number of catalog in the publisher side and lesser number of catalog on the subscriber side. So one reason to understand that there could be a copy option templates on this publisher which is not synchronizing on the subscriber side.
Yeah.
So for now, VCD will not throw any message or not show you any warning. It has to be looked at manually and it has to be understood at the starting when we do a publishing and subscribing of the catalog.
So it seems to me make sense to me. So basically the secondary vCenter is running a different TPM, so it has to be a replace function. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So all this what we have spoken is CDS aware. So if you have a environment within Cloud Director service with the same version, this is applicable over there as well.
As long as your endpoint's using TPM. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So to moving on to the next major release within this dot release is the IDP proxy for TMC local. So what is this feature all about? So this feature was basically introduced to authenticate any applications you have within your environment through your Kubernetes applications, you can say, or whatever applications you have, right? So let's say those applications have the mechanism to log in. Previously, what used to happen, the administrator used to create separate user ID and password within that application and provide that to your users. But now VMware Cloud Director can act as an IDP proxy and authenticate the users within the application for the users for which VCD is aware, meaning any tenant users who have an account can be used through this IDP proxy to authenticate the application within the application. The main purpose of this this feature was to support TMC local, again from a sovereign perspective, right? Let's say I have my multiple Kubernetes clusters, Kubernetes applications, and I have to authenticate them or basically have them a kind of a single sign-on within the tenant. Okay, so in this, what will happen? The provider has to onboard the tenant as an IDP proxy, where in which, I mean, basically we call the end customer here as what do you say, relying parties, not customers. So when you onboard the relying parties, in that way, the VMware Cloud Director using OAuth OIDC 2.0 can authenticate or proxy your user request, login request through VCD and log into your respective applications. So this is the main use case, and this is the main use case of this feature, wherein if you have multiple cluster which is local to your sovereign boundary, you can authenticate them using IDP proxy within VMware Cloud Director. So basically, my VCD will act as a proxy, and the application server or the tenant side will act as a server, wherein I can allow my tenant users to log into my whatever destination application I want to, using the same tenant user ID and password through the proxy.
Jay, so
Mhm.
this could be very cool for providers who are delivering application services to their customers. But if a customer is building their own application in like the Kubernetes stack, as long as that application can talk OAuth 2.0, then basically they could offer this proxy as a service capability, I suppose.
They can offer this proxy as a service capability as well. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it require, I know that the whole point about the proxy is to kind of make it a single sign-on authentication and automate that behind the scenes. Would it require the user to be set up in the application as well still?
No, that's the usage of this feature, wherein if the user is a tenant user, the tenant administrator can use that information of the user to authenticate them to the respective end application.
Okay, cool.
That's the main criteria or usage of this function, of this feature.
So a service provider could deliver this like as a service function. It's an additional plus to their kind of portfolio if you're running any sort of applications really that run OAuth 2.0, whether that's from like App Launchpad, Bitnami, or you create your own, or customers creating their own. They can then offer this as an additional kind of feature to the service. Yeah.
Correct. It's the only criteria is that the VCD should be aware of the user. It should be a with tenant user.
Yeah.
No outside other IDP users are allowed to authenticate at this time.
Okay. Yeah.
Previously, if you are a provider admin and if you log into your cloud, your basically your vcloudportal.com site, we used to have the page where we had to provide the organization name. Previously, if we give system, the portal never understood that and always took you to the tenant portal. But now in VCD 10.4.2, if you provide the keyword system, which is also an organization, it will now take you to the provider portal login page. So this is one enhancement we have made from a provider side, wherein the system now understands the system organization. We have now changed the default timeout lease for vApp from 7 days to unlimited. So basically, it's never expired. So this was basically because of multiple requests from customers that they need to have that as a default, because what used to happen, right? Human errors happen, right? We forget to change the lease timeout period, and the vApp expired, then they run into multiple issues. So from now on, unlimited is the default timeout value for a vApp lease expiry. Yeah,
that makes sense. I mean, you don't want your vApps expiring and suddenly you're not using as much of your platform as you thought you were.
So the another enhancement, I would not say enhancement in this version, but it's basically phase 2 of what we introduced in VCD 10.4.1. We had announced that with time, with let's say a couple of releases of VMware Cloud Director, we would deprecate the local users, right? Previously, this was a API feature only, wherein if in case you have to migrate your local users to an IDP within VCD, which is configured within VCD, you had to run a couple of API commands and scripts to migrate them. But now we are introducing the same feature from the UI page, wherein now you can do a bulk migration of your local users to the supported and configured IDP within your VMware Cloud Director. Now, this bulk user migration or mapping is a 3-step process, wherein first we have to select which all users you have to migrate. And then there's an option to export that information in a CSV format. We download that file, we edit that file. I'll come back to the edit, what we edit in that. And then once we have edited the information, which is mandatory as of this phase, we re-upload the file onto VMware Cloud Director portal and then do the migration, bulk migration. Now, let me see if I have a slide. Okay, no. So basically, depending on the IDP you're migrating the local user to, let's say, for example, you're migrating the users to OIDC auth to IDP. Now that in OIDC, the username is basically your email ID, right? So when I download the CSV file, I have to update two things, which is mandatory. One is the username, depending on the destination IDP, which is what format it supports, and the what do you call this? The what's the term? The IDP type, basically. By default, when you download it, right, it'll be local. So I have to mention, I have to make it to LDAP or SAML or OIDC. So I have to update these two fields mandatorily and then upload the file onto VMware Cloud Director again, and then do a bulk migration. Now, as of now, we have not mandated the email ID option, but in the future releases, we'll have to have an email ID option to be mandated, because of course, if we have to send communication, that's the only method, right? So that will be in the future, but for now, email ID is not mandatory. Couple of things to understand here. If the user is a duplicate user, which means that a user with same name, okay, no, forget that. Before that, when I'm migrating the user from local to one of the IDPs, right, the user ID is maintained. Why? Because the user will have many objects tagged to the user ID. So in that case, we are maintaining the user ID because all the existing object the user has will carry forward as it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Second, if in this migration process, something fails, we do have the mechanism to show how many users have failed and how many users have been skipped. When can a user be skipped? If there is duplicacy. When can a user fail? When can the migration fail? If in case some of the mandatory field has not met the criteria. So this feature on the UI now is capable enough to show you how many migration have been succeeded, how many have skipped, how many have been failed. So this feature looks very simple from the front end, but from the back end, it's a very complex thing to change users local to IDP and then keep their resources intact, and then a lot of things. So, but this UI feature will make your process seamless to migrate local to any IDP. For now, we are not stopping the support of local users, but VMware's VCD team strongly suggests that do not, if it's a new environment, do not start with local users from a tenant perspective. Yes, system admin is local. There will be some alternatives to that, but do not start with local users. Start with your IDP solution directly.
Yeah. Jay, just a couple of things on that. So does this fly in the face of the IDP proxy that we just talked about? Because that requires local users.
From an IDP proxy perspective, right now, IDP proxy would not be aware of the bulk migration. If I am right, I mean, if I'm not wrong, but yes, you're right. If I have to authenticate my users, which is local, then of course IDP proxy, I mean the local bulk user will not be effective. But understand one thing: the IDP proxy can also work with any any tenant users who's already in the system. Could be your IDP users, be your local users.
Oh, I see. Okay. So for IDP proxy, you can actually use your existing IDP user base.
Any user known to the tenant.
Right. Got it.
Yeah, that's the criteria. From a bulk user mapping perspective, if it's a local user for that IDP, then yes, the migration will happen.
And the second question is, I guess this automatically filters out things like service accounts and system accounts, right?
Service account is not a regular user, first of all. Okay. Service account is altogether a different entity. So that is not mixed with this bulk user. Bulk user mapping is for users who can log into the UI and perform tasks.
Yeah.
Service account is for only the backend access to the tool to perform API calls.
Yeah, sure.
They're two different things. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Super. Now, the other enhancement we have made is with the named disk ownership. Previously, if you had a named disk attached to a virtual machine, you could not change ownership of the virtual machine because it says that a named disk is attached. You cannot perform this task. And the other thing was, if you delete a user who had a named disk under his resources list, you could not delete or transfer the you could not delete the user or transfer the user who has named disk to this super account. So these two were a big caveat. So this request has basically come from the Kubernetes side of business, because obviously we know, right, Kubernetes spins a lot of named disks within the cluster. So for that reason, now VCD 10.4.2 allows you to change the ownership of a virtual machine to another user while the VM is powered on, which is attached with a named disk. So you can change it from user A to user B without any problem. It was not possible before.
Okay. Yeah.
One thing to understand, as of today, we still do not allow changing the owner of a named disk directly while it is attached to a virtual machine. Second use case, like I said, if a user A has virtual machines and a couple of named disks, and if I delete the user, there's an option, transfer object. We check that box. Now the object along with the named disk object will be transferred to the super user who's deleting the user with these resources. So these are the enhancements we have made from the named disk perspective. Now, this is something which we were already supporting, but not managing it in the right way. So we all understand the basic formula for vSAN HCI Mesh was that if a virtual machine is being placed on a remote vSAN data store, all the files must be on the same data store for that virtual machine. That's a very strong policy which vSAN HCI Mesh wants, right? Up until now, let's say, for example, if we have a storage policy which has multiple data store types, like it could be VMFS local, VMFS shared, local vSAN, or remote vSAN, correct? It is possible for the virtual machine VCD placement policy to pick any data store within the VM to place your virtual machine. Previously, what used to happen, let's say, for example, if let's say local vSAN data store was chosen for storing the virtual machine or some of its file, and it could also span those files in different data stores, which is fine. But what if the VCD placement engine selected the remote vSAN data store as to place the virtual machines or some of its file, but still stored, let's say, 2 disks of the virtual machine in remote vSAN and other files in the other data store, which is not remote vSAN. Basically, we are breaching the vSAN HCI mesh policy, right?
Yeah.
Why was this an issue? Because of course, if I have my, let's say, 2 disks on remote vSAN data store and 2 disks, let's say, on local vSAN data store, I would see performance issue for sure, because they have different capabilities and IOPS. And of course, I'm not adhering to the vSAN HCI mesh policy. So from this version onwards, we now respect that policy and say, for example, if a storage policy has same set of mixed data stores, and for some reason, if the VCD VM placement engine has selected the vSAN, remote vSAN data store, it will make sure that all of these virtual machine file, including the home directory, is within the same data store in the storage policy.
Yep.
Now, there could be situations where the users do not want the vSAN remote data stores to be used. So for that, we have introduced two advanced configuration. One, allow VM to span remote vSAN if it is set to true, meaning the placement engine will also consider the remote vSAN to place the virtual machine and all of its file. And if it's set to false, it will not consider the data store within the storage policy for VM placement. When I say data store, remote vSAN data store.
Yeah,
now,
sure.
That's one advanced configuration, and the command to enable, disable is mentioned on the screen. Second, prefer non-remote vSAN data store. If this is set to true, meaning I am pushing the remote vSAN data store to be least used. That means I would prefer remote vSAN. If set to false, it will be equal based on all the conditions the VM engine has to first meet. All the condition is once it is matched, and if a remote vSAN data store is selected for the VM placement, it will take place with respect. We have enhanced in this version is the data store threshold. Now, before I explain what has changed and what has been improved, we have to first understand there are two types of threshold in VCD. One is red threshold, one is yellow threshold. Both are configurable from the provider side on the storage policy. Red threshold is the amount of free space on the data store, which basically if a data store has a red threshold, that storage will not be used for any VM placement if the threshold is matched.
Yeah.
If it's a yellow threshold, and if the yellow threshold is almost at par with the conditions or with the configuration we have done, in that case, virtual machines for full clone will not be I'm sure we understand what's full clone and what's link clone in VCD as well. So VMs for full clone will not be supported with a yellow threshold data store, which is almost reaching the yellow threshold. So these two thresholds take major these threshold configuration plays a major role in how the data store threshold is calculated.
Yeah.
This is just an FYI slide. What is the problem? What is the fix is now what I will tell you. Okay, so what is the problem statement? Let's say, for example, from the vCenter server, if I have a storage policy in which I have a data store cluster, and that cluster, let's say, has two data stores within the storage cluster. Now, previously, what used to happen, VCD used to always look at the total free space of the data store and make decision. For example, let's say if my data store 1 and data store 2 within the data store cluster has 5 GB of free space. So what's the total free space of the cluster? 10 GB. So VCD used to always see a 10 GB free space available within that storage policy. Now, let's say, for example, if I spin up a virtual machine and select that storage policy for creation of the virtual machine, and let's say I give 6 GB as my VM size, what will happen? VCD will say, oh yeah, I have 10 GB available. It's a 6 GB request. Let's go ahead and create it. But if you go one level down, each data store only had 5 GB of free space. So in that case, after a certain amount of time, the task used to fail. So we have enhanced this calculation wherein now, from this version onwards, VCD will make sure that it calculates the free space of the storage policy per data store level, not at the storage policy or the vCenter cluster or the data store cluster level. So if a data store has 5 GB free, and let's say another data store within the cluster has 10 GB free, depending on the object we are creating and the size of the object, accordingly the decision will be taken. So this is what we have enhanced. Basically, we used to face a lot of problem with this thing when we had automated the virtual machine creation with scripts. VCD will look at the larger number, create the VMs, and all the scripts used to fail. So for that reason, we have now made sure that the calculation or the free space is looked at the data store level. So this is the enhancement made from this version onwards.
That's a nice enhancement to reduce frustration, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And the difficult part is you would not know what has failed where when you have such large script running. And with my experience personally being in support and creating trainings for the customers, majority of the case generator was one of these things that, okay, my script has failed, the disk creation has failed, VCD shows it has so much of free space, but it's failing. So when you used to debug, then we used to find out, okay, this is the problem. So yeah, you're right. So it'll reduce a lot of frustration and help people plan the VM creation accordingly, and then VCD will help it place them in the right way and right manner. Cool. So these were the new features and enhancements in VCD 10.4.2. Looking at the interop real quick and the upgrade path, whatever products you see with the versions which is not italic has been tested with this release. And whatever the later version you see is the version supported with VCD 10.4.2. So these are the products which are the products which basically will function with VCD 10.4.2, and obviously we can also look at the details at the VMware website when we can check what solution supports, what version of solution supports VCD 10.4.2. From the upgrade path perspective, we can again use the VMware website to look at the upgrade path. But yeah, if it's an appliance, we support the upgrade path from 9.7 up to 10.4. But again, it's not straightforward. If you're a 9.7, for example, you have to go to a certain level first and then go to 10.4. And then if it's a Linux, we also support Linux upgrade, but only from version 10.2.2.4 onwards.
Yeah.
Best thing is to look at the upgrade path online. In the interoperability metrics, we have the upgrade option, one of the tabs. Check over there from what version to what version, what's the best path, and then take the path accordingly, and then make sure you have your backups intact.
Yeah, cool. I mean, this is really important for our providers to get onto, I guess, the 10.4 code base, right? I mean,
correct.
You've got upgrade appliances for here from 9.7. I mean, that's out of support now, isn't it?
Yeah. We 10.2 is out of support.
Yeah. So really, think about your upgrade process, and start really prioritizing that so you can get access to not only to these cool features, but also just to keep up with releases and have a supported platform.
Right. Releases plus of course, right. With every release, we are enhancing the security, and with this work from home and this COVID era, right, things have changed so much that security is a big concern. With every release, we are strengthening our security from not just from a feature perspective, but in our code itself, we are enhancing the security. So yeah, of course, since the world is in the cloud, it's important that they upgrade to the latest version from at least security perspective, then the features they can use.
Yeah, exactly.
Super. So this is all. Oh yeah, we have one more slide. So with the 10.4.2, we support API version 3.7.2. It's a new version of API, which if in case you're using 10.4.2, then use this API version for all your scripting and API tools. So sizing guidelines remains the same. Basically, sizing guidelines will only change for every major release. So since this is a 10.4.x release, so the sizing guideline remains the same. And with that, I believe we are at the end of the presentation.
Jay, fantastic, mate, and good rundown of the features, some good detail there. I think for me, the TPM one's really exciting, but also I could see there's a need to try and get local users off onto your IDP, and all sorts of kind of nice things to take away some of the frustration that maybe previously felt as well, especially when you're automating things with like Terraform and stuff like that. So some pretty cool stuff there. Jay, thank you very much, mate. Really appreciate your time.
Always. Thanks, Guy. Pleasure always recording the session for the cloud providers, and I hope it's informative, and please upgrade to latest version as soon as possible you can.